light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I just wanted to offer a few thoughts and reflections on the question or the phrase, the statement, the idea of spiritual health, with or without religion. To begin with, my understanding, when we ask, okay, before we decide what to do with it, first to measure and decide what is it? What exactly is something? There have been a lot of people who have benefited from religion, but there have been a lot of people over the centuries who have been seriously hurt and wounded by religion. What, after all, is religion? And I'm sure there are probably 1,000 different possible definitions out there at least. My personal definition is that religion is society's attempts to systematize or standardize dealing with the spiritual element within each person. That somebody saw something spiritual within themselves, something spiritual within the people around them, and they tried to come up with a way of answering it, and maybe it used a sacred text, maybe it didn't use a sacred text. Maybe like the neo-pagans with the Book of Shadows, it's not so much a sacred text written by somebody else for you as it is a journal of your own experiences of dealing with spirituality, noting what was effective and what was not effective, what somebody recommended but didn't have the same effect in your life. All these sorts of things go into a journal that essentially becomes that person's Book of Shadows, because there's no standard Book of Shadows that every other witch attempts to go by. Every other witch, neo-pagan, whatever term, practitioner, whatever term one would like to use. The word witch has been used in so many different ways over the centuries that you almost have to ask people to define what they mean by witch every time you hear someone use it, so that you can create a context and a specific definition. For me, witch is simply a practitioner of paganism, and paganism in general, Wicca in particular. But there are a lot of different uses of the word witch, some of which do not mean the practitioner of the old faith, as it's sometimes called, or of the nature-oriented faith, but could be a category of costume for Halloween each year. The word is used in a lot of different ways. When I used it just now, though, I was referring to people who embrace nature spirituality in specific ways. In any case, even paganism was in fact a religion, a tribal or societal attempt to standardize and systematize dealing with the spiritual element within each person. Within modern pagan circles, a lot of the people I run into are combinations of all sorts of diverse things. I refer to myself as an eclectic mystic, someone who believes in mysticism, in the spiritual paranormal, in deities and angels and so forth, and yet finds most of them to be shrouded in mystery in ways that my finite mind can learn about and grow towards, but never fully comprehend. By definition, though, the word God, to me, even from my earliest Roman Catholic days, the word God would mean that spiritual being beyond human comprehension, the perfection of wisdom and the perfection of love. And in any case, not to digress on that whole subject, because I could talk for a long time on that too, spiritual health is what it comes down to. For some people, spiritual health is very specifically nurtured by being involved in a particular religion, a particular coven or congregation or synagogue or assembly of some sort. For others, no matter which congregation they attend, no matter which church they visit, no matter which coven they no matter to which coven they introduce themselves, somehow the pieces never quite fit, and they're still left searching, wondering, so where is my spiritual family? I don't know how to answer the question of spiritual family, because that's a broader and more complex subject than the one we're dealing with today. But if the grouping can be considered an extended spiritual family, in order to figure out, is this my family, we would have to decide what dynamics does family need to include. And are those dynamics present, or am I once again in a situation where I have to play elephant in the living room, overlooking all sorts of things in order to be there, and finding in the end that in some ways, not to be vulgar, but in some ways we're all drowning in elephant dung. That there is this elephant that's been in the living room so long and created so much dung and excrement that it's rising, and the level is rising, and it's becoming more and more impossible to live in the presence of such. The whole point of that, though, of course, is what you need to do is stop ignoring the elephant in the living room and get the elephant out of the living room, and then begin the cleanup process, which could be a very long and involved cleanup process depending on how long the elephant has been there. Religion, for many people, has become the elephant in the living room that is doing more harm than good. If we want to shift it around to where religion can be, in my opinion, what it was always intended to be, the way I phrased it in one of my newsletters, Sister Whose Perspective, was that I don't have a specific argument against institutionalized religion. I simply think that we need to get back to using our religions to support our relationship with the divine, instead of using the divine to support our religions. The church is supposed to be a tool, not an object, not a destination, not a goal, not the accomplishment toward which we're working. It's a tool and a servant that is to facilitate the relationship between the human and the divine. Whether that divine is conceived of as embodied in nature, embodied purely in spirit, embodied in idea, embodied in science. There are so many different ways to view that which God truly is. In figuring out what exactly are the basic principles of spiritual health, the first thing that one has to bear in mind is that all of it is essentially about relating to that which is greater than ourselves, and to a similar extent relating to that which is smaller than ourselves. It's about these immaterial vertical relationships above and below, showing compassion to everything that is the same as or weaker than ourselves, and showing humility toward everything that is the same as or greater than ourselves. And not looking down on others, on other things, but understanding that all of life is this interconnected web of existence, and that there is a sense in which everything is dependent upon everything to do whatever it can in order to form this holistic, holy wholeness, this world in which we live. That it was engineered and designed, whether by evolution or God or whatever name you want to ascribe, that it was put together in such a way that it is so interdependent that the plants must exhale oxygen and we must exhale carbon dioxide in order for each other to live, that the animals have cycles through the seasons and through life, that some creatures live 50 years and some only live 10 years, and that too is part of this very complexly interwoven fabric of life in the midst of which we find ourselves at a specific point in time. And what makes it all the more bewildering sometimes is how our lives overlap, but not at exactly the same level. Some are born 5 years before us and live longer than we do. Some are born after us and live shorter. There's something in that complex overlay, though, the effect that my life has on the life of another, the effect that their life has upon me, all of that feeds into this dynamic of spiritual health. It could be overwhelming and distracting to the point of almost making one crazy, because it's just so much to absorb. Except that at some point we have to let go and understand that it's not about controlling all of the relationships and all of the factors and all of the influences all around us. It's not about ensuring that every drop of water and every breath of air is pure, and that every relationship is totally functional. And I mean, it's too much for one person to take on. And nevertheless, all of us are basically put in situations where we're doing it every day. But perhaps we need to be most compassionate toward ourselves and understand that although we were put here for a reason to do as much good as we can while we're here and so forth, we also need to understand that it's about the growth of the soul. It's not about accomplishing a perfect score this time around. It's about finding ways to love even without seeing, to love that which cannot be seen, as well as loving that which is seen. If there have been some people who claim to be so spiritual that they could love that which is not, seen, but when I've observed their behavior and the way they treat those whom they can see, it becomes so disappointing and totally erodes their credibility. I have a very difficult time listening when they come up to me and say, I am more exalted, I am more mature, I am more accomplished, I have more spiritual consciousness and knowledge than all those other people, because they're still learning from me. And usually that kind of thing will generously stoke the fires of my skepticism and cynicism. I tend to be an optimist, actually, but when someone is basically setting up a situation in which, I keep trying to think, what difference does it make if everything they said is true? And the only thing I've been able to really come up with is that it kind of disallows me the freedom to question them. It's as if they don't know how to deal with being questioned, and so they're adding this other part about how exalted they are, so that I will hopefully not have the nerve to directly and openly question them. And of course, if I do, in my experience, that's usually where the conversation ends, and they make a point of avoiding me for the rest of the day or week or whatever. Oh well, it seems to me that the greatest security any of us can have is the embrace of the truth. And the nice thing, I guess, about embracing the truth is then you don't have to remember what you told so-and-so. All you have to remember is what actually happened, to the very best of your ability. When we talk about spiritual health, though, with or without religion, spiritual health with religion means that I am viewing the church or whatever religious body or entity or ritual, viewing that as a tool to serve the nurturing and growth of the relationship of myself to what is beyond me, beyond my comprehension, beyond my perception, beyond direct material observation. There may be things within me that are smaller than I am, but that are very infinitely greater. I recall the one Walt Disney animated show in which there was a battle of wizards, and in the end, they set down some agreed upon rules at the beginning, one of which was no disappearing. And then the one magician finally at the end vanished from view, and the other magician started complaining that we agreed no disappearing. And you hear the other magician's voice coming out very quietly from somewhere and sounding distant but not really distant. And he says, no, I haven't disappeared. I've just become so incredibly small. And because they were assuming all these different forms, animals and dragons and everything. And so the the second magician says, "So what form have you assumed?" And he explains to the first the first one explains to the second magician, or to the wizard, "I have become a virus." So he was not invisible. He had simply changed himself into a germ that went in through her skin and made her, because it was, one wizard was a man, the other was a woman, made the woman so sick that essentially he won the competition by becoming a foe that went within her and which she couldn't fight that way, because she had no way to fight a virus. And so as we look at that in terms of spiritual growth and religion, we come back to this point of recognizing that that which is small is not necessarily impotent, and that which is large is not necessarily powerful. And the individual may find more spiritual growth in solitude than they ever do in community. But it's not that way, but it may not be that way for everyone. So that there may be other individuals who will find more growth in community than in solitude. Because in community you have access to that many more teachers and that many more stories of other people's experience. The challenge, I suppose, is that specific step of making the spiritual community a tool rather than an object or a goal or destination. Shifting to the level of churches, there's often the perception that if you have lots of attendance, if you have a abundantly well-equipped budget, if your church is looking state-of-the-art and beautiful and expensive, then clearly you must be a success. On a more real level, however, if you had to measure how much actual spiritual growth has taken place here, it could be that the growth that was accomplished there was done at such a high cost that it simply isn't worth replicating. Because it's not the flash and the sparkle and the bling and the glitter and all the grand illusion of perfection, shall we say. I say illusion because I don't know if I believe in perfection. I believe things can look perfect from a distance. I believe churches can look perfect from a distance. But the more you get to know what goes on inside the people, the more you find out that they really are struggling with all the same usual things: doubt, faithlessness, love and belongingness, senses of community, senses of being attached, sense of mattering to someone. In whatever group you name, all those things come to the fore. Is what's the real reason this is happening? The challenge at that point is to remember that it's not about continuing the habit. It's about embracing the truth. And if the truth is that this particular setting is not moving you closer to, emotionally closer to the divine, if it's not genuinely empowering, then I guess it's kind of like the anthills on July 4th when I was about 7 or 8 years old. When I was very small, my cousins would visit from another city just over the state line, and they would come up and say, "Let's go set off some firecrackers." And so we would try to find the biggest anthill we could, and we would lean way over so we weren't too close so the ants didn't suspect anything, and we would poke the anthill full of firecrackers. And then we would basically light all the firecrackers and back up and watch the explosion. And afterwards the anthill was virtually a crater, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of ants scurrying everywhere, trying to rebuild the anthill as quickly as they could. I don't know I could never quite figure out what the point of it was, other than to take some sort of satisfaction in the fact that we had created that much activity, that all these ants were rushing around like crazy because of what we had done. and that there was supposed to be something intoxicating about having that much power over an anthill. I'm not sure I ever quite figured out what the point was, though. So after a couple of years, I totally lost interest in it. It was like I was being told it was supposed to be exciting, and it wasn't. And I had to be honest enough with myself to recognize that it wasn't. And in the same way, when I attended a Pentecostal church during my early teenage years, I had to be honest enough with myself to recognize that when they said, "It's the Spirit of God," to look around and see everybody moving in this way that seemed to be an obvious reflection of peer pressure, that everybody wanted to fit in, and so everyone had to kind of act like everyone around them. And there really wasn't anything that came out of the majority of it that showed me these people were any more Christ-like or any more genuinely loving, understanding, or compassionate than any person I met on the street who didn't attend church at all. And so I understood it as a sort of communal peer pressure, and I understood that for somebody at some point it probably was helpful, but there was a whole lot of pretending going on. And I couldn't see how sanctioning that kind of lying to yourself should ever be permissible inside of a church, much less anywhere else, but especially not inside of a church. If one finds those environments helpful to growth, great, keep it up, grow and be blessed. But be careful that you have not taken the experience and made the experience the idol. That to worship the experience rather than the divine or the God behind the experience. It's like, it would be like composing a letter to someone whom you dearly love on the most beautiful stationery and sending it off and then deciding to go visit the person. I sent them a letter and that was nice, but I'd really rather go visit them. But I've already mailed the letter, but it'll be a surprise. They'll appreciate this as a surprise. So you go and you get to the person's house and they won't answer the door because they're busy reading your letter. And you try to tell them, no, but I'm really here. And instead of coming to look, they simply answer, whoever it is, you'll have to wait. I'm busy reading a letter from a friend who loves me very much. I have to wonder, when it comes to spiritual health, if there isn't a lot of that going on. That in creating these churches, we've created a form, a protective armor, if you will, that is supposed to keep out doubt and uncertainty, when in fact doubt and uncertainty are simply absolutely normal and perhaps even necessary inclusions of a path of spiritual growth. The question ultimately is whether your path of spiritual growth is in fact carrying you further toward relating effectively to that which is greater and lesser than yourself. Whether you are finding inspiration and vision, whether you are finding ways to love that you hadn't noticed before, whether things are making sense that didn't make sense to you even 2 or 3 years before. Whether you are learning to be more multidimensional. That love is not just about good feelings, but love is about actually empowering another human being, empowering another human being to be more than they've ever been in the past, to try instead of giving up too easily. You can create individual spirituality and have something to share when you get to church. But if you go to church to get individual spirituality and to get a sense of divine presence to carry with you, kind of like going to a well in a village, going to the central well in a village in times past and drawing out a bucket of water and trying to take it home with you. And the problem is that the well ultimately, for purposes of our metaphor, the well has no more water in it than the people of the village put into it. That that this well is actually not so much an artesian well springing up from within the earth as it is a man-made well, and the only way for there to be water in it is to put it in there in the first place. And if we do not put the water into the well, then there will be no water to take out when the time comes. If we do not go to church with the intention of giving something, of making this average sort of religious experience into something that has the ability to support individual spiritual quests, to support individual spiritual growth, that when we hold our churches and our synagogues and our covens and all of our spiritual and religious organizations to that standard, that we wind up with something that becomes more than the sum of its parts. We wind up with something that allows us to function as community, to collaborate, to come together, when we're no longer competing for who has the most members and who has the biggest offerings, but when we're now competing for who has the most opportunities to love everyone, to reach out to everyone in need,